The first bill on our calendar for the day is House File 1440. The clerk will report the bill.
House File number 1440, number 1 on the calendar for the day, an act relating to housing, the second engrossment.
Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the author of the bill, the member from Hennepin, Representative Howard.
Mr. Speaker, members, every day, everywhere, all across our state, Minnesotans are struggling with the high cost of housing. And every day, more and more Minnesotans are falling through the cracks. Like Jennifer, a single mother with a 5-year-old child. She lost hours at her work to care for her child when he fell sick with COVID, and she lost her job. She fell behind on rent. She was evicted and became homeless. These life-altering experiences for Minnesotans are multiplying every day, and our housing crisis is only growing. Last year, over 20,000 Minnesotans were evicted. It is truly a statewide problem. Pipestone, Grant, Olmsted, Clay, Wadena, Chippewa, Roseau, Jackson, and Yellow Medicine County all have seen over 100% increase in evictions compared to pre-pandemic levels. And these represent the largest increases, but of course, every Minnesota county across the state is facing challenges. In Hennepin County, family homelessness increased by 268% last year. Think about that. A 268% increase in families with children experiencing homelessness. We just talked about how can our students learn in our schools if they're hungry? Well, how can our students learn if they don't know where they're going to sleep at night? So what this bill does is recognizes we need bold and urgent action to address this crisis. And what this bill does is provide $50 million in emergency rental assistance through the FHPAP, or the Family Homelessness Prevention and Assistance Program, so that we can prevent homelessness before these families fall into crisis. The FHPAP program is well established. It serves Minnesotans in all 87 counties. Local experts, often counties or lead social service agencies in the area, are able to coordinate services and assistance for Minnesotans experiencing housing stability. It's a program that works, and by targeting resources to those existing providers, we can get money out the door faster because it's long overdue. I want to provide a couple examples of how these resources are utilized. A senior adult in Dakota County was living with their adult son. He lost work because of a chronic illness and fell about $3,000 behind in rent. He realized the rent had become unaffordable and was seeking to move in with a relative, but desperately wanted to avoid an eviction. FHPAP was available to help close that gap and help him move into a better housing situation. I also want to highlight that these resources aren't just rental assistance, but the kind of one-on-one support often that folks need to find a stronger path forward. In Ramsey County, a mother fell behind on their rent because she was having to lose work to care for her disabled child. Her caseworker was able to work with her to create housing stability, and also suggested that she get her CNA because she enjoyed caring so much for her child. She did. Now it's a well-paying job and has a flexible schedule that works with their family needs. Members, this is a program that works and works well, but there's one flaw. We have never funded this program at a level anywhere near commensurate with the need. And as we've already discussed, that emergent need is growing. During committee, we heard from an administrator of this program who said they release these FHPAP dollars quarterly. And in just the first few days, those funds are all gone. And so in a matter of months, they release all the funds in 3 days, and then every time the phone rings for the next 3 months, they have to say no to people that are facing a housing crisis. Specifically in Clay County, just between July and December, more than 1,000 families that sought assistance had to be turned away. That represents 80% of the folks that applied for that assistance. And as I just mentioned, Clay County had one of the highest increases in evictions last year, 138% increase. So members, I hope you see the corollary here and why this bill is so important to help folks maintain housing stability before falling into crisis. It is absolutely vital and life-changing and life-saving resources. Members, we face a multi-layered, challenging housing crisis. We absolutely need to be investing in better care, services, and transitional housing like we're doing in the Pathway Home Act. We need to build more affordable homes to rent and to own. We need to create more pathways into home ownership so folks can build generational wealth. We need to be doing all of these things. But what we need to be doing today is addressing the emergency that's facing Minnesotans all over our community, the emergent need that they face for our neighbors that are in crisis. When they pick up the phone and ask for help, someone needs to be there to answer the call. So it's time that we answer the call by voting yes on this bill today. Thank you.
There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Howard moves to amend House File Number 1440, the second engrossment. The amendment is coded A9.
I recognize the author of the amendment, the member from Hennepin, Representative Howard, to explain the A9 amendment.
Mr. Speaker, the A9 amendment removes some unnecessary language that clarifies the bill and aligns our language with the bill that's moving in the Senate. I'd ask a yes vote.
Further discussion to the A9 amendment offered by Representative Howard. I recognize the member from Isanti, Representative Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, members, Representative Howard, thank you for this amendment. What this amendment actually does is set this funds up so it's actually available to the entire state. It doesn't prioritize one area of the state. It makes them all the funds available throughout the entire state. So thank you, Representative Howard.
Any further discussion to the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting the A9 amendment, please say aye. Those opposed, please say no. The motion prevails and the amendment is adopted. Members, we are now on further discussion of House File 1440 as amended. Is there any further discussion? I recognize the member from Isanti, Representative Johnson.
Just point of question, are we on third reading now?
No, we are not, but we can do third reading. There are no further amendments at the desk. The clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File Number 1440 as amended.
Third reading as amended. Discussion, Representative Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, members, what's interesting on this bill, it originally started as $100 million, now it's down to $50 million, which is 2.5 times the amount that we originally was in the budget for this biennium. We have 3.5 months left in this biennium, and we start the next biennium, which we're hoping to have target numbers here in the next few days so we can actually figure out how much money is going to be spent, how much money is actually going to give back to the taxpayers who overspent, who were overcharged almost total close to $20 billion. Now, I know we've spent a lot of money over the years on the homeless to the point where we could have bought most of them a home. And now we're going to spend $50 million more. I'm wondering if Representative Howard would answer a couple questions.
Representative Howard will yield to a question. We do not, we only ask members to yield to one question at a time, but he will yield to a question, Representative Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Howard, with this $50 million, I'm just wondering where it's going to go. Because in lines 1.10, it states the agency may award to existing programs. I'm just wondering if this is supposed to be for existing programs, or are we going to start new programs throughout the state with new nonprofits receiving this money, or is it going to be going to the current system that we do have that seem to have worked very well?
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Howard.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Johnson, these resources will be utilized for existing FHPAP providers. There are 20 of them across the state. They cover all 87 counties. In the metro area, they're largely the counties that administer this. In greater Minnesota, often it's a lead social service agency. But the intent of these resources are to go to the existing FHP-AP providers. We do that because we can get resources out the door quicker. It's also why it's important we move on this bill now today and get it to the governor as soon as we can.
Representative Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Howard, thank you for that. If we're going to have new people, it'd be hard to get this money out the door quickly, especially when we have a new budget coming to an effect here in a few months. And on the governor's proposal, it's not $50 million or 20 and a half like we had this last biennium. It's $120 million for the biennium. So it makes me wonder why we need to do $50 million for 3 months when we have a new budget coming out. Would Representative Howard yield for another question?
Representative Howard will yield to a question. Representative Johnson.
Representative Howard, in the bill it says the money is supposed to be spent by, I believe, June 1st, 2024. Can you tell the body and the people listening what that of the $50 million we're spending on this, if the money is not spent by that date, what happens to the extra funds?
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Howard.
Mr. Speaker, I would expect that money would be returned to the general fund. But what I would say is that I have every expectation, given the need, that those dollars absolutely will be spent before then.
Representative Johnson.
Representative Howard, thank you for that information. Representative Howard, you had talked about the eviction issue where it's up major, over 100% in some counties. But what you failed to mention is we went 18 months with no evictions. They were banned by the executive order from the governor. And we just started getting back into doing evictions where property owners and housing providers were not able to evict people that were not paying their rent. We had a program for them. But the way it was set up, all they had to do is start the application. They didn't have to finish it. They didn't have to do anything. Just start the application, and they could not be evicted. Those people are now the ones getting evicted that didn't follow through, while the property owners and the housing providers were not getting paid, although they still had the bills, they had the mortgages. A lot of them had the utilities that had to be paid with no income coming in. I know I talked to a few of them, they ended up losing the properties because the people didn't fulfill their obligation of paying their rent or finishing the paperwork for the program to get the housing providers their money. Now, if you take a look at the list of on the graph we received in committee showing the eviction rate, yes, it was up. But if you added up all the numbers and put them into those 18 months, we're actually down on eviction notices. Do we need some of this money? Some of these people need these helps? Absolutely. At my church, I'm the deacon. I've had to make a couple phone calls this past week for people needing assistance. I forwarded them to where they could get it. And I also called the housing provider and talked to them, getting things worked out so the person doesn't have to get evicted. And the 3 housing providers I talked to, their exact words, they said, if the person would have came and talked to us, we wouldn't be in this spot. It works both ways on the eviction process. The housing provider does not want to do that, and generally, if the leasee or the renter goes and talks to them, they can usually work it out. and the property housing provider will actually find them places to get their help. So, members, you can vote however you want on this. There are people in need. There is resources for them. I don't think we should be, if they're doing the program properly, I have a feeling a lot of this 50 million should come back, especially with the amount that the governor wants to put in this next biennium. So everybody deserves a place to live. Nobody should be out on the street unless they choose to be. But there's also personal responsibility the individuals have to take to make sure that they pay their rent. Find a job. Speaking of jobs, I just Googled it today. In Minnesota, there's over 214,000 job openings. Everywhere you look, there's help wanted. And 70% of those 214,000, about roughly 150,000 jobs are full-time jobs. We need, if they're having trouble making their rent, are they working or not? I want to help them, but when we help, I don't want to give a handout, I want to give a hand up, getting them out of their situation, keeping them out of their situation. The worst part about this bill, it doesn't require any educational training to make sure that we give them the hand up and not the handout. Because all a handout does is keep them down. We need to make sure when we pass bills off this floor dealing with the homeless is to make sure we're giving them a hand up to help them make sure that they get out of that situation and stay out of the situation. Because without the full wraparound services, we're doing them a disservice.
I recognize the member from Carver, Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Chair, I'm sure you're not surprised it wouldn't be a housing bill if I didn't ask some questions, so if the author would yield to a question.
Representative Howard will yield to a question. Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Chair Howard, question for you on lines 1.13 through 1.14. It talks about the use of this, and it says that qualified families may receive more than 24 months of rental assistance. I think we talked about this in committee, but I just wanted to see if you could establish for us a baseline. What does that mean? It seems very open-ended. If you could maybe define what more than 24 months of rental assistance might be.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Howard.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Nash, this language creates some flexibility to provide some of that ongoing assistance. I had mentioned one of the stories about a mother who was on FHPAP for a full 24 months with a child that has a disability. She was able to use those resources through those 24 months, and her caseworker was able to help create a path to a stronger path forward. And so in current practice, very few times are these resources being utilized for that length, in part because the resources are so scarce. But we want to create some flexibility, and that's what this language refers to.
Representative Nash.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. If he would continue to yield.
Representative Howard will yield for another question. Representative Nash.
So thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Howard, maybe just a hypothetical. This could then possibly go for 48 months that we would be paying for someone's rent.
Representative Howard.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Nash, that's not been the practice. We could come up with hypotheticals, but I don't think that's likely.
Representative Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the point that we made in committee, Mr. Chair, and the point that we'll make again here is, if that were to be the case, if 48 months, 4 years were to be the case, that's an exceptionally long time that we'd be doing this for. And I have questions as to how long the money will last, because as it shows in lines 1.8 through 1.9 that the appropriation is one time. So my fear, members, is that this is a one-time appropriation of an additional $50 million, and it could go on for an extended length of time. My concern is that that money runs out, and then you're going to be coming back to the well and say, well, we need another $50 million, because that's what the original number was. We wanted $100 million, and it could go on for 4 years. I just have some trouble with the open-endedness of that, and I did talk about that in committee, and members on my side did as well. I think that it's potentially setting up a very bad precedent for the state of Minnesota to potentially pay for 4 years of rental assistance. And I certainly recognize, Chair Howard, that there are unique circumstances that people need help. But my fear, and I said this in committee, my fear is that this sets up a precedence for a lot of folks to potentially tap into this when they themselves could be working and don't need the assistance. I have some level of trepidation on that. And then lastly, Mr. Speaker, I'll just say, I recognize the need for some of this, but we have a housing crisis. And Chair Howard, you did say that we have a housing crisis, and you said that it only grows in your opening statements. Well, I agree. We agree on that. We have a growing housing crisis. It is the worst in the nation. Hands down, the worst in the nation. And to date, we have heard mostly bills that are kind of just sending money out to help people that are in existing units of housing. We have heard one bill that I'm not sure that it's going to make it even through its next committee stop, because it's universally not regarded by multiple sides of the aisle. We've not done anything to build new homes. And I agree with your opening statement. Our housing crisis is growing. It is profound. And it is the quadratic equation that I always use. This is part of it, but we haven't talked about any of the rest of it that is in the build new houses part of the equation. And I am quite disappointed in that, but that's for another day. I think that this does set up a precedent that is potentially long-term problematic for our state. The author admits that it could go for 4 years of rental assistance, and that in my estimation, and I'm not assigning motives, Mr. Speaker, but in my estimation, this opens up the door for more and more and more appropriations, given that the initial ask was for $100 million. Do we come back next year with a deficiency bill, a request to say, oh, we need more? Turns out a lot of folks like this, we need more, and then we come back the first year of the next biennium and we say, oh, well, we need more. I think it opens up the door to some very troubling things. I'll be voting no, and it isn't because I don't recognize the need to help people, I do. But I just think that this bill is constructed in such a way that it allows for some very open-ended practices to become reality, and for that reason, I'll be voting no. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion to House File 1440? I recognize the member from Carlton, Representative Dotseth.
Thank you, fellow chair. Representative Howard, will Representative Howard yield to a question?
Representative Howard will yield to a question. Representative Dotseth.
Thank you, Representative Howard. We've gone a long way with this bill in committee, so I appreciate your efforts that you've put in place here. The question I've got is, this is an emergency fund. I've seen some robust numbers that were presented to begin with. Now it's at $50 million, which is extremely robust still. I'm just wondering, since this is such an emergency, if these funds are not used, what will be done and with those funds and where they'll be spent?
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Howard.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Dotseth, I'm really not concerned about the funds not being spent at this level. In fact, as is mentioned, we sort of pared this back. I think the need is actually quite greater. And when we get to our omnibus bill, we might be looking at some of those more long-term build into the base type of needs for a program like this. But what this bill calls out to do is to get this $50 million out the door as soon as we can, given the crisis that's right in front of us and has been in front of us.
Representative Dotseth.
Thank you, Chair Howard. I just want to congratulate you on actually working with that amendment that you presented earlier. That was a showing of trying to work across the state, which is very helpful. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion to House File 1440? I recognize the author of the bill, the member from Hennepin, Representative Howard.
Mr. Speaker, members, I look forward to some green votes here. I also want to just give a few thank yous. First and foremost, I want to thank the advocates who, for more than a year, have been ringing the bell and saying that we need to address this crisis. I remember vividly when it was announced that the federal resources for rental assistance had dried up, and we had advocates come to us and say, Minnesotans are still struggling in this pandemic. We need to respond. If we don't do something, we're going to have an eviction crisis in this state. And you know what we have? An eviction crisis in this state. Their efforts have pushed us forward, and it's long past time that we take action. I want to thank the partnership with our folks across the body in the Senate, with the Governor's Office and Minnesota Housing. We have a lot of alignment to move quickly and move fast because we need to. And then the last thing I just want to mention, just a little bit to this notion of, who finds themselves in a housing crisis and why. And let me be clear, the number one reason that folks find themselves in a housing crisis is that housing is unaffordable. Right now, over 500,000 Minnesotans are paying more than 30% of their income in rent. More than 200,000 Minnesotans are paying more than 50% of their income in rent, more than half. When you're paying more than half of your income in rent, by the way, 9 times out of 10, these are people that are working. Wages have not kept up with housing prices, not even close. So we're talking about working families who are paying more than 50% of their income in rent. And when you're paying more than 50% of your income in rent, you're one bad break away. You're one of those stories, like I mentioned, away from being in a housing crisis. And that's why this is a multifaceted work that we need to realize that everything's at the center. If people can maintain housing stability, so much more can go right in their lives. But when folks face that crisis, I see as an obligation to say, we are going to be there for you, Minnesotans, and we need to be there for Minnesotans today, and we do that by voting yes on this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on House File 1440. The clerk will close the roll. There being 73 ayes and 50 nays, the bill is passed as amended and its title agreed to.